Today's lecture is going to cover making simple renderings using hand drawings, line drawings, and Photoshop. So first, I'm going to go through some examples of very simple rendering styles, and each of these you can use on this next assignment. So here you can see a very simple line drawing. This project was probably modeled in a program like Rhino, and then the person probably did the Make 2D tool that we discussed in the earlier digital class to get the line drawing, and then it was simply using collage in Photoshop to add in some of the textures and colors in the center. This is another very simple line drawing, probably taken from Rhinoceros, and then another very simple collage technique on top to add emphasis and to tell what's going on in the space. This one I think is a little more successful because one, it is rendered a little bit, so there's a little bit of shade and shadow, although in Rhinoceros it is all turned gray or white. But what I think is more successful about this is the use of line weight and line type. So you can see here that the architect is adding in some darker line weights up above to add emphasis to the beams going across the space. And then there's even a small area on the left that uses dashed lines here to show something that's going to happen. In Photoshop, the architect probably just added a very simple, so this is in New York, this is the Brooklyn Bridge, and so they just basically Photoshopped in that in the background to give a little context. This is another technique where it's a very simple line drawing in the back, and then this uses collage to a very big degree to Photoshop in all of the different types of grasses and landscape elements and people as well. Another example of collage to make a perspective. So what you should notice here is that the architect or the designer is really not going for a realistic perspective. They're communicating an idea. And so don't worry about getting it exactly right. A lot of this is just collaged in. This one is a lot more complex, but what I like about it is the liberty to which they use collage to piece this together. So look down here in the bottom. I mean, this is sidewalk, and it's not pieced together right, but we understand what they're communicating. Over here is really just a photo of a street that's been put here to give it a little bit of context. This is something probably a little bit closer to what you're going to be using on this next assignment. So here, this is a hand-drawn drawing. They may have taken a perspective out of Rhinoceros and simply traced it. So when they do this by hand, they're able to add line weight really easily. So lots of us sketch with line weight automatically. And so they can add as much detail as they want to that. And then just in very limited places, they add some information. So there's a lot of people in this one to show how the space is being used. But then they add like this one image to show that there's a video being played or a movie being played on the wall. They add this red element here that is pretty important. And then there's just this green element. And that's really all the material or color that is communicated about the architecture. This is another example of using a hand drawing and then overlaying it with just a few collage elements. It's not even that much. In this one, what I really like is the texture up here in the sky. So this is actually just the trace paper texture that's left when you scan in trace paper. And so they traced this by hand, and then that's the texture that was from the sheet of paper. Again, a hand drawing, you can even see the lines extending to where the perspective vanishes here. That adds a nice little quality to the walls and to the space. And then they just simply add in a handful of figures into the space. And then this is a very simple collage technique onto the background. Again, you don't have to do the whole thing. They really just added a box here of blue, and then you've got a little bit of context along the right, and then the hand drawing on top. This is the same firm. This is Diller and Scofidio. Again, it's not realistic, but it gives the impression of what is happening in this space. Another example, this is, you can do this kind of thing in Photoshop. So they've got some text here or some light that's being projected onto a wall. Notice that you don't have to color in everything. They just put color in very particular places. You don't have to put textures on all the walls. The only wall that really has a texture is this brick wall over here because that's pretty important. The other walls are probably very smooth. This one is also a hand drawing that's just been traced over a photograph or a rendering of the project. Notice that the background image here is really just giving it some context. So this is a house that's in a typical community or in a typical neighborhood. You've got, somebody cutting the grass, you've got somebody else coming home, and then there's a car. And then more examples of this same technique. But you can sort of see, here there's very little information that's been photoshopped on top. Basically 2 figures, a rug, and then just a little bit of glass. But the rest of it is really left blank. That's really useful when you're doing rendering so that you don't have to figure out everything, because you're not going to be able to figure out everything. So just don't feel like you have to Photoshop every single surface. Some more examples. This one, the person actually did some shading with their hand. This one photoshopped a very simple sky in the background to give it this ephemeral quality. So now we're going to go through how to actually do this. So first, I'm going to show you what to start with. You may be starting with a simple rendering out of Rhino or SketchUp, but you can see here I basically did this rendering and just did a very simple shaded view. I did not do any of the lines here. Here's another version of it where I actually lightened it up. So this could either be my starting place, or you can start with a simple hand drawing. This is probably where a lot of you are starting. So you can sort of see that there. So depending on what you're good at, I happen to be pretty good at hand drawing, and I can add emphasis with line weight. So that's one way that I like to work, but it's really up to you. If you wanted to model a simple space of your building that you're talking about in Rhinoceros, and make 2D, it will give you these lines. So that's one way. It's really up to you how you do it. But the process for overlaying these in Photoshop is exactly the same. So we are going to first open up the Photoshop document. And let me turn off some of my files. Okay, so you will probably be starting with a rendering like this, or you'll be starting with a line drawing like this. Now, I've actually used both, and you're more than welcome to use both, and I've basically overlaid them and scaled them to fit appropriately, and so you can see how the lines and then the massing sort of fits together. One thing that you should understand is that when you bring this in, this is what it's going to look like. So my composite is on top of the Rhino render, but you can't see the Rhino render right now. So what I would encourage you to do is that for your scan of your drawing, you come up here and you hit multiply. What multiply does is that whatever is black in the image will become 100% opaque, and whatever is white in the image will become 100% transparent. And so it actually allows you to overlay things. The next thing that you do another thing that you might need to do is you might need to affect the opacity of the underlay. So see, if I think that gray is too dark, I can always push it down like that. And that's how you do that. Then, some of the things that you'll have to do when you start to Photoshop elements into your project is that you will need to find some images. Now, I'm sure if you speak with your TAs or some of the upperclassmen, they probably all have a file library where they have images of things that they Photoshop into rendering. So they'll probably have a collection of people, and you should start making your own collection of people that you use for your renderings. They probably have a collection of furniture, a collection of trees, a collection of anything like that that you might be putting into your renderings. They'll probably have a group of, some skies that they can use depending on what they're trying to communicate. These are the JPEGs that I collected for this example. So you can see here I collected that sky. This is the sky that I actually ended up going with. I also got a texture off of Google, just a simple Google search to add a texture to the ground. And then this is an artist, but I wanted to kind of have a cocktail party going on in mine, and so that was what I got for my person in this one. Now, you should notice that in this assignment, you're going to have to take a picture of yourself. It's really important to be able to take photos of people at the right angle to fit into a perspective. So, what you do is you open those up in Photoshop, and you will have to cut them all out the way that you, let's see here. All right, so there are the people in this one, but when I cut them out and brought them in, this is what it looks like. So let me go ahead and open up that picture to show you how you do this. So if this is what I'm cutting, oops, you should zoom way in, and the way that you cut is you come over here to this tool right here, it's the polygonal lasso. You select that. You're probably going to want to set this feather up here to about 1. And what that does is it makes it not have such a hard edge. But you can see that I've started cutting this out. And you just start going around. Now when you get to, now you need to actually really cut out as closely as possible to what you're wanting to cut. On this, you'll see I'm going to skip over, so up here at the top. So let's say that I've gotten to his elbow. If you hold the space bar down, you can actually pan the sheet and then let it go, and you can resume your cut. So just know that if you get to a part and it's outside of your view, then just hold down the space bar and continue along. Now you do have to cut this out really well in order for it to work. So I've already cut it out. I copied it and pasted it in here, and you can see the people there. And then what you do is, just like you learned with 1 point perspective last semester from Lynn Craig, is that you need to find your horizon line, which is about, well, I'm a little low in this picture, but these people are probably going to be about this tall, based on that stair and the opening. And then you simply scale the people. So if you go up here to edit, well, transform, scale, then hold down the shift key. You should always hold down the shift key when scaling things, and then you can scale them to the appropriate height. Let's move them right there. And so that's how I did that. And then what I did is I actually went to, I just went to adjustments and probably levels. And then you can change some of the information on them. You can sort of gray them out. You can edit the opacity with them so they kind of are see-through, and that's kind of how I got to the people that I included in this. So I'm going to turn them off now. Another thing that I did is that I added in a sky, and this is the sky that I brought in. And I put it in the background, so it's on the bottom because I want it to read everything in the back. And what you have to do is you actually have to cut it. So this is the one that I ended up using. So you have to place it appropriately. But then what I did, so I probably said that's going to be my image. So I drew a rectangle around it. I said select inverse. So I selected what's outside of that. And then so I deleted it like that. So that's how you sort of cut it down. And then I went in here and I messed with the opacity so that it was a little bit light. So you can, push it into the background a little bit more. I'm just going to back up here. Okay, so I'm back to where I was. Something else that's pretty important when you start to do this, because there is a good bit of detailed work with this, is that I had to come in here to my Rhino render, this one right here, and I had to actually cut out all of the windows in order to see through it, because I didn't want to set this. If I set the Rhino render as multiply like I did on the sketch, you would end up with that, and that is not going to work because the building's not see-through. So what I needed to do is to come in here really close, and I had to use the polygonal lasso with my sketch. And so if I didn't have the Rhino render, I would be doing this to the actual sketch. And you have to select these pieces, and then you would cut them out. So let's just say that this panel right here is another window. I would come in here like this, and I would delete it. And that is how you do that. Now, you should notice that I've got some windows in here that have mullions, and you do need to make sure that you leave those in here so that you don't see through them and so it looks realistic. So that right there is a pretty decent perspective, and it's very simple, not much information. Now it's up to you how far you go, and I wouldn't say that it actually gets better the further you go. You sort of have to know where to stop. But let's say that you wanted to give a texture. Hold on just a minute. I'm going to show you this. So here is the texture that I found for concrete, and I wanted to give the floor a texture. So I bring this in here, and then if you go to Edit, Free Transform, I think is what I used for this. But here you can sort of scale it out like this, fill out the floor, and then you have to go in here and you have to cut out where the floor is not. And you can sort of see that. And I have a lot to cut out here, so I'm not going to do it very detailed. But basically, you have to cut it out everywhere that there's no floor. Okay? So the final piece for that is here. And you can see that there. All right. And then you just keep going. You don't have to keep going, though, and you should understand that sometimes you can go a little too far. But you can even, like if you have important color in your building, so let's say these walls were purple, what I did was I made a new layer. You make a new layer by going here, and new layer. Okay, you should label it, so let's wall color 2. Using the polygonal lasso, you trace the wall. You come down here to the paint colors, double click, let's turn it red, okay, and then edit fill. And this is the foreground color. And that is how you would add color to things. And you should know that, again, you can edit the opacity on this. You can do all kinds of stuff. But that is how you add some color. And there are lots of different ways to do that. So this is how you do a very general, simple rendering in Photoshop. For this assignment, we are asking that you have a hand drawing or a digital drawing of the arrival space in your movement analysis, that you add yourself to the Photoshop, to the image in Photoshop, and that you add one piece of furniture to the perspective. The piece of furniture should be designed by the architect or should be something that is appropriate for the space. Please understand that the people that you add to spaces and the furniture you add to spaces really tell a story, so you want to make sure that those are appropriate for what you're trying to communicate.